we're going to keep talking about. Let's be honest. We're going to keep talking about Jalen Hurts, and until we see this offense, and we're not going to see this offense until September 13th, really. Training camp, we now know, starts July 28th, first practice the 29th. But, my framework, I keep going back and forth. Every time Nick talks to us, he throws a little bit of an Easter egg in there, I like to call it, where he'll say, like, well, of course, we're not going to scrap everything we've done. We've been so successful. You've heard it multiple times. It makes perfect sense to me. And you've heard Sean Mannion say blended approach, yet it feels different this time. It does feel different this time, that they're really, really trying to play a different style of football. How do you marry those things in your mind? How do you think about those things?
Well, real quick, too, on what Joe said there about, BG, BLG, I would like to remind people that Brandon Graham's middle name is Lee. So he's actually technically a BLG, too, obviously more popularly known as BG, and me as BLG. But to answer your question, John, I don't think it's about reinventing the wheel, right? Like, I think anyone can agree that it's not like, well, we need to tear this down to the studs and kind of completely get rid of everything we've done ever, considering they've had success to a large extent. At the same time, it's very clear that last year did not work. It was a very disappointing offense. The fact that they led the league in 3-and-out percentage, that shouldn't happen with the talent that they had here. And I would say good coaching is going to maximize your talent. So I feel like in broad strokes, it has to be getting back to getting the most out of what you have here. And I think we get caught, the royal we here get caught in the mindset of like new automatically equals better. That's not necessarily true. No, I do think innovation is good and like is needed to some extent, but just because you're doing new stuff doesn't mean it's automatically gonna, number one, work, number two, actually be really effective. So I do think there has to be a balance of what you have done. Obviously people want to see them skew towards more newer things and innovation, but I just don't think it's as simple as like you're reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always say that not everything new, innovation is great, but not everything new is innovative. In fact, most new things fail and are kind of crappy, whether you think about business as a whole or business ideas. But the things that are truly innovative, and that's part of my problem as well, and I think it's part of your problem because we've discussed that in the past, is I don't like the copycat mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it. I want the innovative guy. And right now, I mean, maybe Sean Mannion's that. All we don't know much about Sean Mannion other than the people he's coached under, played under. And it's Sean McVay, it's Kevin O'Connell, it's Matt LaFleur, most notably as a coach. And they play a certain style, and that's what we think he's going to do. But I always go back to Jonathan Gannon because when he came here as the defensive coordinator, I said, oh, okay, we're going to get some Mike Zimmer A-gap stuff, and we're going to get some Matt Eberflus cover 2. Maybe mix and match that. And he played something totally different. He played Vic Fangio. He copied Vic Fangio style. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's different. Maybe he is innovative. But if he isn't, I do have a problem. I do not want that guy. Like, I get wanting to play a scheme. I get being, I guess, for lack of a better word, jealous of a scheme. But I mean, all these football cliches, and they're there for a reason. And one of them is if you're hiring a scheme, you're wrong, which basically to me amounts to you build around your players. And there's conflicting signals everywhere. I'm going to put $1 in the swear jar for you, BLP, because I'm going to mention Larry Karras. Like when we first got to know Nick, he told that story about Larry Karras. I don't know if you're there. You probably heard it, where it's like he was interviewing to be the offensive coordinator at Mount Union, and Larry Karras kind of fooled him. And he said, all right, let me hear it. What do you want to run? And Nick started to say whatever he was going to say, what he thinks Larry Karras wanted to hear. And he slapped the desk. Nick always slaps the desk. And he said, you don't even know who your players are. In other words, wait, you're not going to marry yourself to a certain. So you have that Nick Sirianni. And then you have this Nick Sirianni said, I got to play Kyle Shanahan's scheme. What I'm my head is spinning.
Yeah, I don't think, like you said in there, you don't want to hire the scheme. You want to hire, a person you really believe in. So I think that's, the kind of the case for optimism, or that's like, if you're looking at how this could work out and be good, I think it's possible. The Eagles are betting on a very smart offensive mind here. What at least seems to be, by all indications, what people say. We haven't seen the on-field results yet, obviously, to back that up. There's a long way to go in that regard. I think maybe if you want to spin the fact that the Eagles didn't look so good in the spring practices on offense, maybe that's in part because they're truly are, going for these new changes that'll take time. And maybe those changes will be, they will manifest and work out over the course of the season, but maybe they won't. Maybe some of these, struggles we saw are an indication that it's like a work in progress, and this could take some time, and maybe almost too much time, depending on how long it takes to finally click, if it does at all. So I think it's possible, again, that Mannion is a bright mind. I think that's entirely on the table, but kind of want to see a little bit more first to fully believe that. And if it works, I think this team, could take off in a big way, because you get this offense going and this defense, everyone almost expects it, I think it's safe to say, to be really good. They could be a special team, but that offense to me is just a big question mark until they actually prove something.
Yeah. Well, I think, from the higher perspective, the team's perspective, and I'm in that category. I think the defense is going to be great. Yep. But almost to the point where they can't live up to my own expectations. I'd realize that it's not going to be quite as good as I expect. And the offense, on the other hand, will probably be better than I expect, because I'm kind of at a low level right now, and not because of Sean Mannion, because of what you said, growing pains. And, Sean, I think by all indications, is a really bright guy. But I think you're going to have some growing pains. You lose AJ Brown. I don't think the skill group is nearly as good as it was. Mm-hmm. And that comes not only from the loss of AJ, but I think Saquon's not where he was at the heights. And you have a little bit of drawback there. A little bit of drawback with Dallas Goedert. I think Devontae's still maintaining. But overall, I think the skill position group has taken a step back. And then the offensive line, which I think could save the season if 5 guys stay healthy. But what are the odds that those 5 guys stay healthy? That's my biggest concern, because if all of a sudden Lane Johnson becomes Fred Johnson again, and instead of Brett Toth, you have Drew Kendall in playing for Landon Dickerson or Cam Jurgens, and God forbid Michael Jordan, or Miles Hinton. I mean, that could derail things quickly, and it's not even Sean Mannion's fault. But my thought, and everybody talks about the Minnesota game for obvious reasons last year. 158.3 passer rating, perfect passer rating for Jalen Hurts, 19 of 23, 3 touchdowns, I think. But everybody forgets the next game. It was against the New York Giants. The Eagles dominated that game as well. They won 38-20. Now, bad team. Mm-hmm. Jalen was 15 of 20 in that game, 4 touchdowns. I think his passer rating was 141 or something. So he had those 2 games in a row right in the middle of the season where it's like, man, that is the definition of efficient. But he threw it 43 times over those 2 games. Is that to me is the formula? Like, if I'm Nick Sirianni, that's what I'm trying to go for. and that's not criticizing Jalen Hurts, but you have to be run first, and you have to be very efficient in the passing game because the run is clicking. Is that how you would build the team? If you got to build this Philadelphia Eagles offense, is that how you would build it, or would you go in a different direction?
I think that's the ideal. I think that's what they want to do. I think there are certain cases where Jalen, like there are certain games in the season where Jalen might have to, drop back 30 plus times, whatever. There's going to be games and game scripts that just call for that, like more often than never. That's not what your plan is going into the game. I think you do want to keep the attempts down. I think that's kind of the way to maximize Jalen there. I think you can be really efficient in these kind of like lower, pass attempts kind of games, ideally when you're pairing it with the run game. And that's not even just about like hiding him or a knock on him. It's part of because your run game at its best version of itself. Jalen contributes to that, not only literally him as a runner, but the threat of him as a runner, and defenses having to respect that. So that's kind of like baked into what the pros of Jalen Hurts are. And it's not just merely, being packaged as like, we're trying to hide him. I think that's just the optimized version of him. It's an optimized version of a lot of quarterbacks.
Of everybody,
but certainly some quarterbacks can handle, more of like the 35 plus pass. You look at Matthew Stafford, for example, someone like that. But that's honestly not really the norm. I would say more of the exception.
But I think people do forget there were good moments on offense, and that was the highest moment, that 2-week stretch. But there was also the red zone work. There was actually some good with that offense, obviously overshadowed. But I do think there were things to build on, which is why I kind of question the overriding approach to change things so dramatically from a philosophical standpoint. Maybe the answer is they're not changing things from a philosophical standpoint. We're going to have to wait and see. Outside little development yesterday, we had talked about Brendan Sorsby before, and if the Eagles might select him in the supplemental draft, BLG. Well, that's not going to be possible. It looks by all indications. The NFL announced it will not be holding a supplemental draft this year, which means Sorsby is out in the cold, can't play in the NFL. Until he enters next year's draft. You can't sign as an undrafted free agent until you go through the draft process. I suppose he could play in the CFL if he wanted to, or the UFL next spring if he wants to get going a little bit quicker. This one kind of surprised me. And we'll see how it goes from a legal perspective, but there's just not enough time, I think, for things to happen for him this year. And there was quite a bit of buzz that the Eagles might have been potentially interested in Sorsby as a supplemental pick. I can't imagine day 2, but if it drifted, I could see them taking the cost benefit approach on day 3. We'll never know now. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Because if you put in a bid for Sorsby in a supplemental draft, eventually it's going to come out. You put in a bid, and Jalen Hurts is going to know. Do you think that would have impacted Jalen Hurts, or he's kind of proven he's a little bit more mentally tough than, say, Carson Wentz was when the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts?
I almost think it would have been ideal in terms of like if you spend probably not a second. There was some talk that it'd be a second. That seems too high to me. Maybe a third, maybe some kind of day 3 pick. Regardless, whatever you use on him, I think he's going to be suspended, assuming he, does make it. If he had gotten, if he was allowed to enter, it's going to face a suspension. And at that point, maybe it's a year-long one. You kind of just stash him away like the Eagles did when they got Isaiah Rodgers the first. You kind of just put him to the side and on the back burner. And it's unfortunate in terms of like he can't practice with the team at that point. So the developmental potential you're getting there is limited. But it's not even a threat to Jalen Hurts because he can't even play in year 1. He's kind of just over there off to the side, not even in the building. And then you reassess the quarterback position in 2027. And if it's the case that Jalen Hurts was awesome in 2026 and you sign into a contract extension, great. Now you have a guy who could be a really cheap backup potentially, because Tanner McKee and Andy Dalton probably aren't going to be back on the team next year. No. So that kind of seemed ideal to me, that you would have someone cost controlled like that. And if the worst case scenario is that Hurts, doesn't look good, okay, now you have someone you might be able to pivot to, or at least could be in the conversation as a potential replacement option down the road. So to me, it seems like a good opportunity, depending on the value, that you could kind of just look as a long-term play. And I didn't think it was a big threat to Jalen, as much as it's just, you have to think about the long term of the position. So it's kind of a bummer, certainly for us too, in a slow time of year. There wasn't that intrigue, or at least, it would have been fascinating if we somehow learned that they tried to get him and it didn't work out and another team ended up getting him instead.